before you scroll, what if I told you that science says that actually when you die, your consciousness doesn't die? This is really crazy. It's not religion, not philosophy. This is actually science. And we're going to watch this video together and react to it. So let's get into it and let's watch.
The more I study science, the more I understand how our brains are the most complicated object in our bodies. And as I learn more about scripture, I've just been obsessed with learning how science connects the two. What if turning the brain off doesn't always turn you off? When you look at what science has found, it very strangely lines up with what scripture says about the soul. I found studies where cardiologists followed hundreds of cardiac arrest patients who were clinically dead. So they had no heartbeat, no normal blood flow to the brain, just flat or near flat brain readings on the machines. And some of those patients, they came back with very clear, detailed memories of what was happening around them while they were supposedly unconscious, things that were able to be verified. Now, I want to share some of the more interesting stuff that I found because, don't get me wrong, all those studies and those testimonies, they were really cool. But I'm a pretty analytical person, and so I needed to see more evidence. Let's layer all of that with something called split brain surgery. In severe epilepsy, surgeons will sometimes cut the corpus callosum. Basically, it's the thick bundle of nerve fibers that connect the left and the right hemispheres. And there were experiments by Sperry and Gazzaniga that showed that when each half of the brain is shown different information, while cut, okay, they can act independently somewhat. One hand can point to something, the other side of the brain knows, even when the speaking hemisphere can't say why. So for a while, this was interpreted as two minds living in one skull. Okay, so they cut the brain in half, but they were still able to.
Like, this really blows my mind. This is amazing because, like, the human body, how we're designed, I mean, there's no denying that God is real. I mean, this is just intelligent design, just our brain with how complicated it is. I mean, you cut the brain in half and it's like it can function each on its own, but it can't. But yet our brain works together as one. Like, this is just so mind-blowing, and I just love how she explains it.
Okay, so they cut the brain in half, but they were still able to communicate somewhat independently. So they thought it was two separate consciousness that were trapped in the same head, because technically that's what it should be if you were to cut a brain in half. Problem was is when you talked to these patients, they didn't feel like two people. They reported unified sense of I. There was follow-up work that scientists did that argued, even with the corpus callosum cut, there are still subcortical and residual connections between the hemispheres, which means that when the brain is divided, the self isn't. Their subjective experience remains a single stream of consciousness. Do you get me? Now, yes, each side of the brain can take in different information and sometimes respond independently. Like the right hemisphere guides the left hand to point at something, and the left hemisphere can't verbally describe, but that doesn't mean that there are two separate selves or two souls. The patients, they still reported feeling like one person with one identity. There was more research that showed that even after the main bridge between the hemispheres is cut, the brain still has other ways of sharing information, and there's still a single awareness overseeing everything. And the reason that it's so shocking is because surgeons literally split the brain's hardware in two, yet the self didn't split with it, the identity.
Like, this is so mind blowing. Like, even when the brain's like cut in half, it's still trying to communicate together. I mean, wow, that's just amazing.
The identity, the I, the awareness, the observer stayed whole even when the physical wiring was severed. That means that the thing we experience as consciousness didn't fracture when the brain did, which challenges the idea that the self is just a brain circuitry. Instead, it hints that awareness isn't fully produced or contained by neural tissue, but might operate above or beyond it. And that's why these findings freaked out the scientists, because it contradicted the assumption that the brain generates the mind. And spiritually, this lands right where scripture has always placed the soul, not made of flesh, not confined to neurons, and able to exist apart from the body. Jesus even taught, do not fear the one who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul, implying the soul isn't bound to biological structure. And so when you destroy the
Like, that is so amazing when she quoted that verse because, like, our soul can't be killed, you know? Like, our physical body can be killed, right? But our spirit, like, our soul, it can't be killed.
to biological structure. And so when you destroy the brain's wiring and awareness persists, split brain research ends up mirroring a biblical worldview, the one where consciousness survives the hardware. That's like breaking a phone in half and then discovering the software keeps running. And suddenly you're forced to consider the possibility that the software never really lived in the device to begin with. And that realization is exactly why this research weirded out so many scientists. Isn't that crazy? So now put those two bodies of research side by side. On one side, people with no normal heartbeat, no normal brain activity, and yet a small but consistent minority came back with very vivid, structured experiences and sometimes verifiable perceptions. And then on the other side, you have people whose brains have been physically divided in half, and yet their sense of self and identity remained unified. What doesn't make sense.
Your heart can stop, your brain can flatline, but you don't disappear. God is in control of the storyline. Just right here, what she's been saying. Because, I mean, the person can die, but the consciousness does not die. That just tells us that there is an afterlife, there is hope, but your hope needs to be in Jesus. Do you know Jesus? Because if you do, you know where you're going after you die. But if you don't, there is the alternative to that. There is hell. So there's heaven and then there's hell.
Doesn't make sense to me is that if consciousness were nothing but electrical signals generated by a fully intact brain, you would expect the opposite. Awareness should then vanish when the brain is offline, and identity should fragment when the hardware is then cut in two. But that's not what we saw. We see hints, just hints, that consciousness may be more like a field or a signal that uses the brain rather than being manufactured by it. And this is where it quietly lines up with scripture. The Bible has always treated the soul as something that can exist apart from the body. Jesus talking about the one who can kill the body but not the soul, and Paul saying to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. The biblical picture is that your brain is a vessel, a tent, a temporary interface, but you are more than tissue. Listen, modern research doesn't prove heaven, and it doesn't scientifically prove a soul. But when you have studies like those, It makes the findings sit a lot more comfortably inside a worldview where the soul can survive the body than inside a worldview where you are nothing but neurons. And so, yes, the responsible thing for me to say here is that I am not saying science proved the Bible, even though it's.
I feel like this is going to shatter a lot of atheists out there because they like I don't know what all of them believe, but when you die, that's it. That's just it. Like it like she talked about with the whole cell phone. So like if your cell phone gets run over, that's it, right? It's gone. It's dead. But with how our minds have been created, the Lord created our minds. So even if our body gets destroyed and we die, we still live on. We have a spirit. And that's what throws a lot of these doctors off because they're like, how did that person die? So, like these people that have near death experiences, they die and then they describe the whole room in context of what was going on. How would they know that? And there's multiple stories of near death experiences that I've heard about, I've seen, I've also talked to people about, and it's crazy because you can't explain these type of things. So we do know that our spirit lives on, like our consciousness still lives on.
I am not saying science proved the Bible, even though it's got me pretty damn convinced. What I am saying, though, is when you look at near death research and split brain research, honestly, the simple story of your brain is you and death is just lights out, it stops being so simple. There is serious peer-reviewed work that suggests consciousness sometimes behaves as if it's not fully confined to the brain. And for those of us who believe in a God who made us body and soul, who promises life beyond the grave, that's not a threat to faith. It's an unexpected echo.
Thank you so much for watching this video with me today. If you've ever gone through a near-death experience, I would love to hear from you. Drop that in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe